Her true story from Connecticut. I saved $900 for my son's gift, but they ditched me for their new mom on my birthday, so I rewrote my will during dessert. They sent me leftover cake. I sent them a legal letter. Guess who owns the beach house now? He's still alive. I thought she was sleeping in her grave with some leech in her mouth. LOL, I turned 80 on a Thursday. The air was crisp in Connecticut, with just enough sun to warm the porch, and a breeze sharp enough to remind me I was still breathing. I dressed early that morning, nothing too fancy, just the blue blouse that matched my eyes when I used to get compliments. I brewed my coffee and set out 2 cups just in case someone dropped by. I even sliced some lemon for tea the way my granddaughter liked. I was ready for company, but by noon, no one came. No text, no call. I watched the hour hand pass. 2, then 3, then 4. At exactly 4:15, the doorbell rang. My heart lifted. I smoothed my blouse, checked the mirror in the hallway just once, and walked to the door with the slow dignity age teaches you. I opened it to find a delivery man in a windbreaker. He handed me a cardboard box, said, "Happy birthday, ma'am," and walked off without waiting for a tip. I closed the door, walked to the kitchen table, and opened the box. Inside was a single slice of cake smashed. Frosting smeared along the inner flaps like someone had dropped it, picked it up, and decided it was good enough. There was no card, just a yellow sticky note in my granddaughter's handwriting. "Sorry, Grandma. We're at Helen's Lake House this week." She says, "Hi." I stared at the note for a long while. Then I looked at the cake, still cold, misshapen, stuck to the bottom like a punishment. I lifted it with a fork. It was hard, dry, clearly not made that day. I sat in silence for nearly an hour, listening to the clock tick over the sound of nothing. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened the FaceTime app and pressed the name Daniel. It rang twice. Then the screen lit up. My son was holding a beer, half reclined in a patio chair. He looked relaxed, suntanned even. His wife Rachel was laughing beside him. And in the background there she was, Helen, the woman he started calling Mom in front of me after his father passed. There was a spread of barbecue on the table. Ribs, corn, potato salad, string lights overhead, music playing from somewhere off-screen. It looked like a celebration. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said, his smile faltering when he saw my face. "Hello," I replied as evenly as I could. "Happy birthday to me, I guess." Rachel giggled. "Oh yeah, sorry we thought of you. That's why we sent the cake." I nodded. It arrived. A little lopsided, but it made it. I scanned their faces. They didn't look guilty, just inconvenienced. Helen raised a glass in the background. "Happy birthday, darling," she shouted. I offered a tight smile. "Tell me, was the old mother not invited?" There was a pause. Daniel started to say something, but Rachel beat him to it. She leaned in slightly as if I couldn't hear unless she whispered, "We didn't think you'd really want to come. You know, with the stairs and the noise. It's not really your kind of crowd." I was about to respond when I heard her say something, not to me, but to someone off-screen. Her voice wasn't quiet enough. "She's still alive. I thought she was sleeping in her grave." She laughed at her own joke. So did someone else at the table. That was the moment. Not when they forgot my birthday. Not when they sent a leftover slice of cake. Not when they celebrated with someone else. But that those words drove something through my chest and woke up a part of me I had been keeping quiet for years. I did not hang up. I closed the call without a sound. I did not cry. I did not shake. I sat for one long minute staring at the blank screen, and then I stood up and walked down the hall. I opened the closet, moved the old coats, and pulled out the iron safe that had sat in the corner for decades. I pressed in the combination. It clicked open, slow as molasses, and I reached in to retrieve what I hadn't touched in over a decade, the original deed to the beach house, the portfolio account I had opened 25 years ago when Daniel got married. And I thought, one day I'll give this to him. The trust papers, the contact card from my lawyer. Well-worn, corners soft. I laid it all on the dining table beside the smashed cape. Then I went to the sink and washed my hands. I was not just a mother anymore. I was not a relic to be shelved. I was a woman with her name still on every paper that mattered. And I was not going to be forgotten quietly. I began saving the day my husband passed away, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I was 50 then, used to working 3 shifts as a nurse and taking care of the house. Money was tight, so I started small. $20 from each paycheck set aside in a separate savings account, marked simply Beach House Fund. It grew slowly at first, but I added dividends from a modest stock portfolio Walter and I set up years ago, interest from bonds, even the occasional tax refund or birthday check from relatives. I never saw it as wealth. I saw it as hope. Each deposit felt like a promise. Every time I made a payment, I imagined Daniel and his future family gathering by the water, children running through the dunes, grills sizzling, laughter echoing under string lights. I pictured our whole brood there, including my grandchildren, telling stories of Walter and me, retired, gentle, at peace. That house was meant to be a gift, the final chapter of my life's work, securing a legacy beyond memory. For 15 years, I added to that fund. I clipped coupons. I drove slower to save gas. I cooked at home, skipped vacations to Disneyland and Cabo. I traded restaurant visits for lemonade pictures on the porch. $100, $200, $500 each week turned into thousands each month. I tracked it carefully in my notebook, dated and documented like I used to with my shifts and patient notes. It never left my mind. It never felt like sacrifice. It felt like love. When I reached $300,000, I felt a thrill I had not felt since giving birth. At $500,000, I called Daniel and said, "Son, you're going to be surprised, and I hope you're ready." Our conversation was awkward, like telling a teenager Santa Claus was real. When I tipped $700,000, I allowed myself to slip the word beach house into conversation when he visited for Thanksgiving. He smiled that warm, prideful way he always did, not quite believing it yet. Finally, after years of careful stewardship, the day came when I could afford a small beachfront property in the Connecticut shoreline. Not Grand Cayman, but just enough. I made sure the house was modest but solid, a place for weekend getaways, sunrises, clam bakes. I paid cash, no mortgages, no stress. I kept every deed, every certificate, every statement. The beach house had my name on the deed. Margaret L. Adams filed in the town hall records. The house was in a trust called Adams Family Beach Retreat, set up under my own direction, designating Daniel as trustee upon my passing. I even included terms, use it for family only, make memories. Talk about your grandmother, and all that was fine until that week. Nothing will take it from you, Helen whispered as I walked past her on my birthday morning, carrying my coffee and a banana bread. I'd baked myself. She said it as if she were naming me a guest. She misread it as a polite correction. I understood it differently. I realized I was just background noise in a symphony where someone else had the conductor's baton. That night, as I sank into the lumpy couch cushion and looked back at the smashed cake that smelled like rejection, a feeling settled in my chest. It was not anger as much as clarity. They had never asked about the beach house. They had never mentioned the fund. When I had carefully laid out my gift, it became invisible. I was invisible. I opened the kitchen safe along the wall as though unveiling a time capsule not to celebrate, but to retrieve what had become essential. I gently pulled cash statements from the vault of my past decisions. I unsheathed the envelope containing the trust documents. I found the deed, the IPO certificates, the retirement account records. None of it had their fingerprints, not one signature except mine. I laid them all on the counter beside the leftover cake, cold and crumbly. I closed the safe and turned off the light. I slept late the next morning. I woke with a sense of purpose I had not felt in years. I called my lawyer, Helen Chan, the one who had helped me settle Walter's affairs back when I could barely say his name without tears in my voice. I asked her to meet me for coffee at the small cafe near the beach house. She appeared within the hour, blinking in the sunrise over water. I didn't invite her in. I handed her the envelope with the originals. She glanced at what looked like legacy background on the house, account agreements, the fund deposit history. I told her everything, the birthday snub. The meanness in Rachel's whispered remark. The way Daniel had not corrected her. I told her that I love them, but I didn't trust them anymore. Helen listened, not blinking, not judging. I told her the beach house and all my life savings were to be directed to an organization I'd worked with in my late 60s. Safe Harbor Foundation, a charity helping women who had lost everything. Shelter, dignity, family. It felt right. It felt powerful. After 2 hours of paperwork, I signed a new will. Beach House would now belong to Safe Harbor. The fund would provide endowment. I named a new trustee, not Daniel, not Helen, someone I trusted from the board. I signed in red ink as the waitress poured my second coffee. I filled in every detail, access protocols, board instructions, project guidelines. I designated use and boundaries, letting my charity board manage bookings, maintain the house, offer monthly retreats to women in need. Then I walked away from the cafe, leaving the paperwork in Helen's care. That night, back at home, I sat at the table again. The lights of the beach house glimmered across the horizon. Mine, but no longer theirs. No longer promised to someone who couldn't say happy birthday. I thought of how I had spent an entire lifetime building trust, and how half an hour of neglect had delegitimized it. I slept peacefully again, knowing that I had given them everything, my heart, my funds, my gift, and they had dismissed me for a stranger. They had served me scraps, literal scraps of cake, and so I reclaimed my future in peace and strength. I still love them quietly, conditionally, tied by blood, but not by trust. They chose a new mother. I chose a new legacy. And as the afternoon breeze carries salt across that beach house, now owned by women I have never met, I feel something I have not felt since Walter died. Relief. I arrived at Helen Chan's office around 10 o'clock in the morning. But I had come prepared for a much longer journey. Helen had been my lawyer since I lost Walter a decade ago. She helped me with the estate, the insurance, even checked in on me on occasion. Her office smelled of polished wood and fresh jasmine tea, a small comfort in a world that had suddenly become very loud. I laid the battered cake box on her desk. She looked at me, then at the cake, then back. I sighed. "It is what it looks like," I said, and I told her the rest. I told her how I saved $900,000 over 25 years, all for the beach house, my gift for Daniel. I showed her the notebook with deposit records from each paycheck, each bond interest, each dividend. I read aloud the sticky note from my granddaughter. "Sorry, Grandma. We're at Helen's lake house." And I told Helen her daughter-in-law had whispered to her friends. I thought she was sleeping in her grave. Helen reached across and took my hand. No pity, only recognition. "Let's fix this," she said. For the next 2 hours, we drafted a new will carefully. Every word mattered. First, we revoked the old will that left everything for Daniel on my passing. It took 4 signatures in the presence of 2 witnesses, legal seals, notarial stamps. My hands were steady. Second, we set up a trust, Safe Harbor Trust, to be used solely as a refuge and retreat for women who had endured abuse, neglect, or abandonment. The trust would hold all 900,000 plus full ownership of the beach house. Lease agreements would allow the trustees to grant access based on need, not inheritance. Third, we named trustees I trust. Women I've mentored in the foundation where I volunteer. None were related to me. None were connected to blindness or entitlement. This was intentional. No heir, no family safety net, just a line of care to those who needed it most. Helen watched as I signed, my name and signature traced across each page, crisp and confident. I affixed my thumbprint in red wax over the sealed envelope. Finally, we finalized the paperwork. Transfers were drafted, notarized, couriered to the town registration office. The beach house deed was amended. The trust was recorded. The charity board met and signed its acceptance. Each copy we folded, sealed, and stored in duplicate. One with Helen, one in my safety deposit box. Then we stood. I took off my jacket, smoothed my hair, and looked at Helen. "Why didn't I do this sooner?" I asked. She smiled gently. "Timing matters, and you waited until you had to." We walked out into the sun. She hugged me. I left the office, lighter than I had been in years. I drove slowly past the marina, let the wind open my window, and felt something like peace. That evening, I sat down with my dinner. Just fish and vegetables, nothing fancy. I poured myself a glass of wine. I looked at the clock, 8:30. I looked at the day's final email. Transfers completed. Trust funded. Deed recorded. I smiled. I poured another glass. I let the calm settle around me. I finished dinner, rinsed my plate, then lay down in bed. In the darkness, I waited for insomnia to come like it always did. But it didn't. I had for the first time in years, I slept deeply and woke up rested, and that's how I knew it was not an ending. It was a beginning written in red wax, sealed with intention, signed by me, and now it would last beyond my lifetime. I received the call the very next morning before I had taken down my bonsai curtain. My phone lit up with Daniel's name. He was calling from an airport. His voice was sharp with urgency. "Mom, I need to talk to you about the beach house deed. He said the closing is supposed to happen next week. I was going to bring the kids down this summer." I pretended not to know anything. I fixed my eyes on my teacup's rose pattern and answered, "That's not necessary anymore. I already completed the transfer." I held the silence in the line until he spoke again. "What do you mean transfer?" he asked. confusion breaking through his tone. I signed the paperwork and it's official, I repeated. You don't need to do anything. He ended the call abruptly. I sat quietly, and soon after there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Rachel standing there, her hair pulled tightly back. She held a half-empty bouquet of flowers and a boxed dessert that looked fancy. Maybe her idea of a birthday gift. I nodded without smiling and led her inside. Where's Daniel? I asked. She flinched. He went to the lawyer's office this morning. He found out. She lifted her chin and said, I hope you realize what you just did. I said softly, I realize who did not realize what I meant to them and that they didn't deserve this gift in the first place. I walked her to the kitchen. She followed, arms crossed, clutching the flowers. I asked, Want something to drink? She shook her head. No, she trailed off. I led her to the dining table and placed the boxed dessert in front of her. Mother's favorite. She looked at it, a mixture of anger and sadness in her eyes. I said, You sent me cake scraps. Here's a fancy version you didn't even open. She didn't respond. Instead, Daniel's voice echoed through the front yard before I had time to sit down. Mom, we need to talk. I heard his footsteps on the porch. Rachel grabbed her box and left without a word. I opened the door for him. He was pressed up against my porch railing, face flushed red, sleeves rolled up as if he intended to fight. He spoke without hesitation. Why did you do it? Why would you transfer the beach house away when it was supposed to be mine? I leaned against the frame and sighed. It was supposed to be yours, I said quietly. Until you made it clear you didn't want me to be yours. He stumbled closer. Rachel asked me not to mention it. His voice faltered. I held up a hand. It doesn't matter. I'm not here for excuses. He looked around as though searching for agreement. But His voice cracked. Then he stopped. This house was supposed to be ours. You gave it to us. I nodded slowly, then glanced at a small framed photo atop the nearby sideboard. The battered cake from my birthday. I walked inside and retrieved a worn photograph from my wallet. It showed the cake slice pressed into the bottom of the box with frosting stuck to the lid. I placed it flat on the table. Do you see this? I asked. He leaned in. I said, You sent this to me. The only thing my family thought I deserved. I looked up at him. He swallowed. The afternoon light fell between us. I drew in a breath. Because someone's mom is still better than no one's daughter, I said. Each word measured. He flinched. Tears welled. You spoke the truth in that moment, I continued. I rebuilt this. I saved. I planned. I trusted. But you and Rachel chose her. His mouth dropped open. I said nothing else. I let it hang. He grabbed at the photograph and balled it in his hand. He beat his head against my front door in frustration, then dropped to his knees. Mom, he said brokenly. I'm sorry. I watched him calm. I reached over and gently touched his arm. He flinched and trembled. I said softly, I know that was it. I let him cry. No words, no demands. Later, after he left, I closed the front door and walked to the window overlooking the beach house in the distance. The sign read, Safe Harbor Trust. The sun glinted off its clean windows. For the first time, I felt like I had been there all along. Liquid silence filled the room as I traced a line in the dust on my windowsill. And I thought, finally, at 80, I had my place again. One they could not rewrite, one they could never erase. That evening, the phone rang again. This time with urgency I had been waiting for. It was my son, Daniel, and his voice was tense. Mom, we hired a lawyer, he began. They say your will might not stand. We want a meeting. I went silent for a moment before agreeing. Come tomorrow at noon. He arrived with Rachel, both dressed neatly, tension visible in the set of their shoulders. Their lawyer, a middle-aged man with open collar and sharp eyes, carried a folder. We sat at my kitchen table. Their lawyer spoke first, leafing through copies of the will. Mrs. Adams, we respect your wishes, but your son and daughter-in-law contest this as a decision made under emotional duress. They believe you were coerced after an upset birthday event. I felt a quiet satisfaction as I watched their eyes flicker to mine. I folded my hands. I am never coerced. I signed these documents freely with assistance from my lawyer of 20 years. Their lawyer nodded. The concern is capacity and undue influence by your attorney. We may seek a court review. At that, I leaned forward. My estate attorney is a respected professional, and there are video, audio, medical attestations, cookies proving I was of sound mind before and after the birthday dinner. Rachel's face crumpled and she quietly cried, "You're destroying the family over a piece of cake. You're ruining everything." Their lawyer cleared his throat. "We respectfully request a mediation process before eviction." I took a deep breath and retrieved 2 documents, the previous will and the revised one. I placed them side by side on the table. They compared them impatiently. "Each line in here has purpose," I said softly. Line 15, "Original will bequeath Beach House to my son." Line 24, "New will Peach House to Safe Harbor Trust, managed by independent trustees." Each change is initialed. I gently pushed the papers toward Rachel. "Here and here," placing the original. "See the difference?" Daniel's voice cracked. "Mom!" But I raised a hand. I addressed the lawyer. "Feel free to challenge. I encourage it. Everything was done on record, and the deed transfer has been recorded with the county. The house is now property of the Safe Harbor Trust. Your clients have no claim." Their lawyer looked down and said quietly, "Mrs. Adams, you exercise sound judgment. The documents are valid and enforceable." No one spoke. Even Rachel, who had only moments before accused me of tearing the family apart, now looked uncertain, lost. I closed my eyes briefly and whispered, "This isn't about destruction. It's about protection of myself, of dignity, of trust." Daniel swallowed hard. "They want us out," he said to their lawyer. The lawyer nodded, then turned to me. "Legally, yes, your son and daughter-in-law are tenants by inheritance, but that inheritance no longer exists. So yes, they will need to vacate." I listened as the lawyer explained further. Eviction notices could proceed, but a standard 30-day timeline would apply. After they left in silence, their footsteps heavy down my front walk, I remained seated at the table. The kitchen light glowed in circles around me as night pressed thick outside the windows. A quiet pride washed over me. They had lost the claim, not just on the house, but on the narrative. They had believed I would shrink, but I didn't. They thought they could intimidate me, but I refused to blink. When the eviction notice arrived in the mail the next day, I pinned it to my bulletin board above the calendar. I wrote beneath it in my own consistent script, "Proof is paper." That night, I drank chamomile tea on my porch. The air was warm, but not stifling. I watched the stars come out one by one, not perfectly, not in a pattern, but each shining all the same. I thought of Rachel's tears, of Daniel's attempts to argue with contracts and lawyers. I thought of the cake that started it all. And with each sip of tea, I realized sometimes the fiercest love is the love we owe ourselves. And sometimes winning means refusing to be erased. I took a blank note card and began to write with a steady hand. "Dear Safe Harbor Foundation, I write this knowing they expect blood ties to be watertight. But I learned the hard way that DNA does not guarantee belonging. I have lived ignored, forgotten by my own flesh and blood on my 81st birthday. I was sent scraps of cake, literal scraps, by people who once called me mom. That moment defined me not as their mother, but as a stranger in their lives. So I offer safe sands. Let this beach house, once meant for a family I no longer belong to, become home to those who lack one. Use it as you need. Retreats, stories, laughter, healing. Let this place remind them that home is not a building, but a promise kept with all my heart. Margaret L. Adams." I signed it, folded it, and placed it in the mail with a sense of release. The next day I saw them at work. Volunteers and staff from the organization arrived in a minivan carrying stacks of chairs and cleaning supplies. A painting crew was already scraping old paint from the porch railing. An older woman with silver curls pulled up dusty plants and replaced them with bright flowers. A sign was carried down from the van. "Safe Sands" in flowing turquoise and sand-brown letter. I stood on the driveway as they drove the sign into place, securing it with sturdy wooden posts. I watched until the sun lit up the words, letting the breeze catch the edges of the letters. The tagline beneath read, "A refuge for those who have nowhere else to call home." The sign wavered like a banner, declaring its purpose to the wind. That afternoon, I sat on the sand with my shoes in my lap and watched the waves roll in one after another, relentless, consistent, healing. I thought of my story. The years spent saving, the hurt of betrayal, the moment I chose myself over convenience. The beach house had been my gift to my family. It had meant security, memory, and belonging. But turned out it taught me something else, that sometimes the gift we prepare for others becomes a gift for ourselves when we finally claim it. A volunteer approached and offered me a cup of coffee. I shook my head with gratitude, but greeted her with a kind smile. They asked for my permission to open the house for a small gathering of women who had lost their families, who had nowhere to go this summer. I nodded. I felt a quiet pride that resonated in every cell. I told them yes. Later that evening, as the sun set over the horizon in streaks of golden pink, I took a solitary walk along the shore. I held my jacket in my arms, not because it was cold, but because I wanted my hands free. I let the sea foam lick at the toes of my sandals. Walking past the new sign, I paused. I read it again. Safe Sands, a refuge for those who have nowhere else to call home. My chest filled with the kind of clarity that known betrayal sometimes births. I remembered the betrayal, but it did not sting today. Instead, it burned into the sand beneath me. A lesson. My dignity had found a postal address. My voice had found a doorway. I closed my eyes, felt the breeze on my cheeks, and let the final piece fall into place. I was no longer a relic in my own story. I was not the leftover, the discarded, the no one's daughter. I was a founder, a protector, a mother to women who had lost everything. And that name, Margaret L. Adams, would now live on in beachside laughter, in tears of healing, in new memories built on purpose rather than bloodline. As I opened my eyes and turned homeward, I knew this was more than closure. It was legacy. I began receiving letters shortly after the beach house reopened its doors as Safe Sands, a name I'd chosen for its promise of sanctuary. The first one came with lavender petals tucked between the pages. The envelope was scripted in flourished handwriting and simply read to the woman who saved the rest of us. Inside a note, "Dear Mrs. Adams, or Founder, how I wish to call you. I have lived 73 years and have never heard the word mother in kindness. Not once. But at Safe Sands today, one of the volunteers introduced themselves as your mom away from home. I felt my heart tighten like someone had opened a door in me I forgot existed. Thank you for letting me taste that word." I folded the letter, ran my fingers over it, and tucked it into my journal. My breath caught because in that moment, I understood that what I had built was alive, not just in sand, but in souls. Over the following weeks, I returned to Safe Sands often, some mornings to pour tea, others to simply sit and listen. I watched women emerge from cars carrying small duffels hunched over from years of hardship or abandonment. They stepped onto the porch with cautious hope, unsure if this place was meant for ghosts like them, but stayed because the air smelled like forgiveness. They gathered under the shade by the windowsill, some reading worn paperback romances, others doing gentle tai chi, arms reaching upward as if they still believed there was something left to reach for. I saw stiff shoulders relax, dull eyes awaken. I saw the fragile edges of people beginning to smile. One afternoon, a small group gathered for a gratitude circle. A woman named Ruth spoke. She had once lived under a bridge when Richard Gere was still in reruns. She said, "For years, people called me inconvenient, a mistake, someone beneath notice. But here, I am family. I might not be blood, but I belong." They folded their hands across their laps, tears welling in quiet unity. And when she called me mother, every drop of doubt I ever felt seemed to wash away. I remembered how Rachel had said I was destroying my family. Instead, I was rebuilding another one without the hurt. The expectation, the silence. Word spread. Other women came. Older wives left after retirement. Grandmothers whose children forgot birthdays. Sisters who lost siblings to distance and bitterness. All welcomed here. No questions asked. All heard by volunteers. All given a bed, a meal, a friend. One letter came from a woman named Clara. I held my granddaughter today and read her a bedtime story. Not because she was mine, but because I was given a moment to matter. That's what you did when you redirected that gift. You gave me back a life that ended years ago. I set the letter aside to read again another day. In my mind, I no longer saw myself as the 80-year-old woman with nothing but memories. I was the founder, the person who turned heartbreak into hope, isolation into inclusion. On the porch steps one evening, I looked out at the beach house glowing lights, heard laughter drifting from inside, smelled vanilla from baking bread. I whispered aloud, not to anyone in particular, "I am not a burden, I am a beginning." Later, I discovered that somewhere in the Foundation's annual report, my name was listed below the Safe Sands logo in honor of Margaret L. Adams, our founder. A book of photos showed small groups in board shorts planting flowers, a banner of welcome home over the porch. My picture was tucked in a corner, not stuck behind glass, but among smiling faces of women who had reclaimed theirs. That night, I closed my eyes and fell asleep, feeling something I had not felt in decades. Full. Not full of anger or hurt or hope, I was simply fulfilled. Because the greatest inheritance I could leave was not the sand or the siding or the savings. It was the sound of someone saying, "I wish you were my mother." And seeing someone believe it, because I was again somebody's mother. I sat on the porch steps that morning, holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea, when a young volunteer named Maya approached me. She wore the Safe Sands apron and an earnest expression. "Maggie," she said gently. So many people still called me that. Sometimes I still get surprised that a woman of your age doesn't feel lonely. How do you do it? I smiled and poured another drop of tea into my cup. The horizon cracked with soft gold as the sun rose. And I watched the front of the beach house. Plants blooming, the signs swaying, women walking inside to morning yoga. "Maya," I began, my voice steady. "Family is not about blood or names or who shows up as your mother. Family is whoever remembers your birthday." I paused to let that sink in. It is the people who say your name and mean it, who celebrate you, not because they have to, but because they want to. Her eyes glistened. She nodded, understanding not just my words, but a lifetime behind them. Looked at the house itself. Gone were the heavy drapes and stiff curtains that once made it feel like a museum. Now the windows were open, laughter drifting out like music. The walls crackled with conversation, soft, gentle, alive. Inside were mismatched cushions, handmade quilts, fresh fruit on the counter, and a group gathered for breakfast. Some reading newspapers, others chatting over juice. I took a sip of tea. I thought about that morning I unwrapped the lopsided cake on my birthday. How they gave me scraps. Literal leftovers, as though I were only entitled to leftovers in every part of my life. That day, I had felt invisible, forgotten, reduced. But I wasn't invisible anymore. Every morning now, I walked through the garden we planted last summer. I watered the flowers that once were weeds. I trimmed the shrubs. I hung wind chimes. Then I would head inside to make tea for discussions, teach a finance class, or simply watch the sunrise with friends who cheered and saw me. I placed my cup on this railing and inhaled deeply. The salt air, the jasmine blossoms, the promise of another day, rooted in purpose. They sent me cake scraps. I gave them proof that mothers are more than expected roles. They are legacies. On my 81st birthday, I lost a family that only remembered how to forget me. But I gained one I never expected. One built on the first rule of a home, to remember. And I gave them the greatest gift I had, dignity. As I took another sip, sunlight sparkling through the trees overhead, I whispered to the breeze, I did not lose a family. I lost an illusion. And in place of lies and bloodlines, I found truth. In the laughter, the letters, the calls, the smiles, a legacy not inherited, but earned. And finally, at 81, I lived as though I belonged. No longer buried by family history, but alive because I dared to rewrite it. If that story touched your heart or reminded you of the quiet strength women carry long after the world forgets them, then you're exactly where you need to be.